On Christmas Eve, my husband, the company's CEO, suspended my salary and delayed my promotion until I agreed to publicly apologize to his new lover. I said exactly one word. All right. That night, the suitcase in my room was neatly packed. I left quietly. A few days later, he and his father kept calling me nonstop. 78 missed calls. Outside, snow fell thick and heavy, each white flake tapping softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows on the top floor like silent accusations. I stood there watching the snow pile up on the windowsill, slowly and deliberately, while the Christmas party below remained loud and alive like another world entirely. Champagne glasses clinked together, laughter echoed down the marble hallways, musicians played a piece by Vivaldi that no one was really listening to. Up here, in my husband's corner office, the only sounds were the steady hum of a laptop and the light tapping of his fingers on the mahogany desk. Grayson didn't look up when I walked in. He didn't do that anymore. "Close the door," he said, his voice carrying the cold edge I'd grown used to over the past 6 months. It was the voice he used with subordinates who disappointed him, with partners who missed deadlines, with anyone who no longer fit the success story he was selling to the world. Right now, I was clearly all of those things. I closed the door. The click sounded louder than it needed to. "Sit down," he ordered, still not looking at me, his eyes fixed on a document that mattered more than the woman who had once believed she was loved. I stayed standing, a small act of defiance, maybe meaningless, but I had learned that sometimes the last power you have left is refusing to make yourself comfortable in your own humiliation. He noticed. Of course he did. Grayson always noticed everything. That was how he became CEO of Von Tech Industries so quickly. What took him from a young manager to the top of power in just a few years? What made the board hand him the entire empire before he'd even turned 40? Surely not because his father was the largest shareholder. He looked up then, and I saw something flicker across his face. Irritation? Impatience? Or something else? "Olivia is downstairs in the lobby," he said, leaning back in his chair like a king settled on his throne. "She's waiting for you, Eleanor." I repeated the name in my head, as if tasting bitterness. Olivia Hayes, the new head of strategy, hired 4 months ago with a resume so perfect it felt unreal. Ivy League MBA, former senior consultant, a presentation on innovation that had gone viral across the company. 27, unmarried, ambitious in the way only people who have never failed can be. And 2 weeks earlier, when I'd forgotten my gym bag and returned to the office after hours, I had seen them here. I said nothing. I simply walked out, leaving behind sounds no wife should ever remember if she hopes to stay married. I drove home in silence, watching the city lights stretch out like dying stars. I didn't speak, because I was still trying to understand whether what I'd seen was an ending, or just the moment I accidentally stepped into the middle of a story that had been unfolding for a very long time without me. "Why is Olivia waiting for me?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. You don't live 5 years with someone who thinks like a strategist without learning how to read the battlefield before the first shot is fired. "Because," Grayson said, standing up and straightening his red tie, the one I bought him last Christmas when the world still belonged to us, "you owe her an apology." The words hung in the air, like the snow outside, frozen for a moment, before gravity pulled everything down. I felt something tighten in my chest. Maybe it was my heart, or maybe it was the last piece of who I was, before I became the woman standing in her husband's office, being told to bow her head and apologize to his mistress. "An apology," I repeated, because sometimes you have to hear the absurdity spoken out loud before you can believe it's really happening. "For what?" I asked. "You know exactly what for." Grayson walked over to the window, turning his back to me, his reflection faint against the glass. "What happened at the strategy meeting?" he said. "You tore her down in front of the entire executive board. You challenged her data, her methodology, and her recommendations. You made her look incompetent." The incident. Of course. 3 days earlier, Olivia had presented a restructuring proposal that would cut 15% of the staff in my division, the one I had built from 12 people to more than 200 over the years. The one that had increased efficiency by 40% and reduced costs by 30% sustainably. The proposal looked great on paper, full of consulting jargon and slick charts, and it would have destroyed everything we'd built in exchange for exactly $3 million a year. A rounded number in a quarterly revenue report. I had pointed that out calmly, with data, with concrete examples. I dismantled every assumption, every consequence, showing why the short-term thinking of a girl fresh out of school might shine in PowerPoint, but turn disastrous when applied to reality. I did my job. I protected my team, my division, the years of work of hundreds of people. The board chairman, Grayson's father, agreed with me. So did the board. Olivia's proposal was shelved indefinitely. The polite corporate language for saying it had been rejected. I was just doing my duty, I said to his reflection in the glass. I presented counter-evidence, I continued. That's what senior executives are supposed to do. You humiliated her, Grayson turned back then, and there was something in his eyes I had never seen before. Cold, calculating, something that made me realize I had been living with a man I didn't truly know. You made her look like a fool in front of my father, in front of the entire board. You need to fix this. Fix it, I said slowly. By apologizing for doing my job, for protecting the livelihoods of more than 200 people, for presenting accurate data that contradicted a flawed proposal. By showing respect, Grayson corrected, by understanding that Olivia is now senior leadership, by realizing that undermining her is undermining me. And there it was, naked and ugly, standing between us like a third person in the room. This had never been about wounded egos or office politics or the merit of a restructuring plan. This was Grayson choosing sides, drawing a line, and making it clear where his loyalty lay. And me, his wife, his partner, the person who had stood by him through every late night, every hard decision, every moment he doubted whether he was capable of carrying this role. I was standing on the other side of that line. What if I don't apologize? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Grayson turned back to his desk, opened a file folder, and slid a sheet of paper lightly across the mahogany surface toward me. Even from a few steps away, I could read the header. Human Resources Action Form, my name at the top. Exactly his style for a moment like this. I thought about it in a detached way, as if I were watching this happen to someone else. Your salary will be suspended effective immediately, Grayson said, his voice completely emotionless. The voice he used on earnings calls, in boardrooms. The promotion to vice president, approved in October, scheduled to be announced at the New Year's party, will be delayed indefinitely, pending resolution of concerns regarding your collaborative approach and team dynamics. Something laughed inside me, something dark and bitter that had been asleep until now. Team dynamics, I repeated. That's what you're calling this? Grayson continued as if I hadn't spoken. Olivia has filed a formal complaint about a hostile work environment. She has documented a pattern of behavior she considers threatening and professionally damaging. HR is investigating. HR is investigating, I echoed, still in that distant voice. The one that appears when shock is doing its job of shielding you from the full weight of reality. Your HR department, the department that reports to you. Reports to the CEO, Grayson corrected, which is me. This isn't personal, it's business. I know how it works. But I didn't. Not really. Because I had never imagined a world where my husband turned the company into a weapon against me. Where he used his position, his power, the very success I had helped build, to force me to kneel before his mistress. When do I need to apologize? I asked, and my voice sounded strange even to myself. Too calm, too even, like I was asking about a project deadline. Tonight, Grayson said, at the party, publicly, in front of senior leadership. You will acknowledge that your behavior was inappropriate, that you respect Olivia's expertise and position, and that you are committed to improving collaboration going forward. And if I do that, I said slowly, my salary is reinstated. The promotion goes through. Correct? He smiled. The smile I had fallen in love with 7 years earlier. The smile that once made me believe in second chances, in fresh starts, in all the things people believe when they are still too naive. I walked to the desk, picked up the form, and read every word, every clause, every detail carefully. Everything was perfectly proper, perfectly legal, perfectly careful in its wording, to protect the company, to protect Grayson from any accusation of abusing his power. I need time to think, I said. There's nothing to think about, Grayson replied. Either you apologize, or the suspension remains in effect, and you understand how a suspension will affect your bonus and your career trajectory. This part I knew. I had helped build those policies when we were laying the groundwork for explosive growth. I had never imagined they would be used against me. Funny, the things people don't imagine. I'll give you my answer in the morning, I said. Grayson's gaze hardened. The party is tonight. Olivia is waiting for you right now. Then she'll have to wait a little longer, I replied, turning toward the door. Don't do anything stupid, Grayson called after me. There was something different in his voice now. Not quite concern, but a kind of calculation, as if he had just realized that a cornered animal can still bite. Stupid, I repeated, my hand on the doorknob. You mean like trusting my husband? Like believing that our marriage vows still mean anything to you now? I opened the door. Don't worry, I've finished learning my lesson about stupidity. I stepped out, leaving him standing in the corner office with its sweeping view of the city and the carefully built empire that was his. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. I needed time. I needed my body in motion. I needed to feel something other than the numbness spreading through my chest like frost. By the time I reached the main lobby, the party was in full swing. The string quartet had given way to a DJ, and younger associates danced with spreadsheet precision, trying to look carefree while staying measured. Senior leadership clustered near the bar, sipping expensive whiskey and talking about fourth quarter numbers. Olivia was easy to spot. She stood at the center of the largest group, holding court, everyone leaning in, playing the role of a rising star with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. She was beautiful in a magazine cover way. Perfectly manicured hands, carefully styled hair, an outfit that cost more than many people's monthly rent. When she laughed, everyone laughed along. Not because she was funny, but because she stood close to power. And power always has its own gravity. She saw me. Our eyes met across the room, and her smile widened. Not warm, but triumphant. She lifted her glass ever so slightly, a performative toast, as if to say, I won. You lost. And now you'll apologize in exchange for keeping your livelihood. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't smile. I didn't turn away. I just stood there looking at her. And I thought of Grayson upstairs, of the HR form with my name on it, of the choice he was forcing me to make between dignity and survival. And then I thought of something else, something he had likely been too confident to remember. I pulled out my phone, opened the pre-drafted resignation email, then typed 2 more words. All right, and sent it directly to my husband. I hit send. Then I turned my back and walked out of the party, out of the building, into the falling snow. Behind me, the party went on. The music kept playing. Champagne kept flowing. Olivia remained the center of attention. Grayson was still upstairs, waiting for my answer. They didn't know, none of them knew yet, but by morning, they would. By morning, everything would be different. By morning, they would understand what all right really meant. When I got home, the apartment was exactly as I'd left it 7 hours earlier. Cold, impersonal, decorated in the modern minimalist style Grayson had insisted on when we moved in 3 years ago. Everything white, metal, geometric, expensive, tasteful, and completely devoid of warmth. I had never liked it. I had said so during furniture selections, in meetings with the designer, in long arguments about whether we really needed a $12,000 sofa that wasn't even comfortable. But Grayson wanted it, and back then, I still believed that compromising on furniture was a sign we were building something together. That sacrificing personal taste was the same as investing in a shared future. I understood later. I began packing as soon as I got home, when it was nearly midnight. After more than an hour of walking through the snow, trying to reorganize the tangled calculations of my own life, I packed everything methodically, precisely the way I handled every other problem, sorting, listing, double-checking, making sure nothing truly essential was left behind. Clothes, documents, electronics, and a few rare personal items that actually mattered. My grandmother's necklace, my mother's handwritten letters, my parents' wedding photo, both of them so young, so trusting, completely unaware of everything that lay ahead. The good years, and the cruel ones, the illness that took my father far too early, and the strength my mother had to find on her own to keep living afterward. I left everything else behind. The art on the walls, the books on the shelves, most of them Grayson's choices, carefully arranged to project a kind of intentional elegance. I left the kitchenware, the linens, everything that belonged to the life we had performed for ourselves and for others. I took only what was mine, only what could fit into 2 suitcases and a backpack. It was startling how little that was. 5 years of marriage, and I could pack my entire presence in that apartment in under 3 hours. What did that say about the life we had built? What did it say about how much space I had truly occupied in the world Grayson had so meticulously designed for himself? By the time I zipped the last suitcase, the sky was beginning to pale, shifting into that familiar gray-purple hue before a December dawn, the moment when the city holds its breath between night and day. He couldn't see what was happening inside me then. Not anger. That would come later. Not exactly pain, though it was there too, buried beneath more immediate responses. What took clear shape in my chest as I stood there, in the cold apartment, was something colder and more precise than all of it. It was clarity, sharp, absolute. It sliced clean through every illusion and self-deception I had maintained for so long about who they truly were and where I actually stood in their lives. I kept packing in silence, in that familiar, disciplined way, while Grayson was somewhere at the company, perhaps raising a glass with his mistress, or perhaps doing something bolder in his office. I didn't take anything that would force me to come back again and again, dragging the humiliation out longer than I could bear. I took only what truly mattered, what belonged to me. The laptop containing years of work and documents. The backup drives labeled with harmless names like personal photos and family papers. The external hard drive hidden deep in the corner of the closet, holding all the technical records, confidential materials, and platforms I had quietly built. I left behind the jewelry Grayson had given me for birthdays, anniversaries. Expensive, flawless, but never really mine, always more about display than feeling. I also left behind the designer clothes he had encouraged me to buy, clothes that never quite fit because they were made for a different role, a different person I had never truly been. All the layers of a life I had tried to step into, like wearing a suit tailored for someone else's body. I left the apartment before the sky fully lightened, dragging 2 suitcases and a backpack, leaving behind a marriage and a life that had never truly been mine. The city was still wrapped in darkness, streetlights casting orange pools across empty sidewalks as I loaded all my luggage into the car and drove straight downtown to the Riverside Hotel, a mid-range place, anonymous enough that no one asked questions when I paid cash for a week's stay and requested a high-floor room, as long as the Wi-Fi was stable. The room had the familiar impersonality of every hotel room, faded wall art, furniture designed for transients, the lingering scent of industrial cleaner from previous guests. I spread my laptop and backup drives across the desk, arranging everything with the precision of someone preparing to step into surgery. The lighting was terrible for long hours of work, but I didn't care. I opened the licensing agreements I had drafted 2 years earlier, when the company first gained access to what they believed was their security system, and began reviewing every clause with the intense focus of someone who understood that her future depended on each legal sentence written in a very different emotional state. Fortress Protocol, the platform running all of the company's critical security systems, had never belonged to them, not once. Despite the assumptions made by their executive team and legal counsel about ownership, all they possessed was a usage license from Apex Sentinel Security, the entity I registered in Delaware, created precisely to protect intellectual property from people who had repeatedly proven they did not value my contributions enough to acknowledge them. The licensing contract ran 37 pages, dense with technical and legal language, something their lawyers appeared to skim rather than truly read, operating under the familiar assumption that it was just a standard software agreement, the kind of document people sign because the technology is valuable, the terms seem reasonable, and no one expects trouble down the line. That assumption was catastrophically wrong. Because from the beginning, I knew I needed a layer of protection built directly into the structure of any agreement with them. That clause granted me unilateral termination rights in the event of a material breach of the duty of good faith toward the creator of the intellectual property. Section 19 defined clearly and exclusively the creator as the individual or entity holding the original patents for the licensed technology, meaning me and only me, because I had carefully registered every patent under my birth name through the Delaware entity that existed solely on paper. The license renewal deadline was exactly 72 hours away. Without my explicit consent, their entire security infrastructure would begin developing cascading failures, starting small, then escalating exponentially as systems attempted to authenticate against a protocol no longer maintained or updated. I sat in that hotel room reviewing documents until my eyes burned from the screen and my back ached from a chair never meant for prolonged sitting. Then I began drafting the formal notice, the trigger for everything that would follow. At 2:15 a.m., unable to sleep despite being so exhausted, my hands trembled slightly as I typed, I finalized the wording. The notice was concise, professional, almost polite. Pursuant to Section 12D of the licensing agreement, Apex Sentinel Security hereby provides notice of a material breach of the duty of good faith relating to the treatment of the creator of the intellectual property. Automatic license renewal is temporarily suspended pending renegotiation of the agreement and resolution of outstanding claims. I attached a PDF of the original contract, highlighting the key clauses in yellow. I scheduled the email to send automatically at 6 a.m. the following morning to the company's legal department with a copy to the head of legal, the man who had dismissed my proposals and then ordered me to apologize to his mistress on Christmas Eve. Then, I accessed the administrative control panel. With a few actions that took less than 30 seconds, I suspended the automatic renewal process scheduled to activate in 72 hours. The system would not collapse immediately or dramatically. That would have been too obvious and could create legal exposure for deliberate sabotage. Instead, the failures would appear almost random. Scattered authentication errors, customer access portals slowing without warning. Internal systems would begin issuing false security alerts. Security certificates would expire one by one as the renewal protocol failed to verify a license that no longer existed. It would feel like a building whose foundation was quietly cracking, hard to notice at first, but gradually impossible to ignore as walls began to split and floors started to sink. I closed my laptop, set my alarm for 6:30 the next morning, and tried to sleep. My mind refused to cooperate, looping through scenarios, contingencies, the reactions they might attempt, but my body would not allow me to stay awake. Eventually, exhaustion beat anxiety. The first call came at 6:47 a.m., exactly 47 minutes after the systems began showing their initial failures. The office landline number from Grayson's floor flagged urgent on the screen. I let it ring through to voicemail while taking a sip of the in-room machine-brewed coffee. Bitter, watery, but with enough caffeine to do its job. 3 minutes later, another call from a different internal company number. Then another. Next was Grayson's personal mobile. I'd blocked it the night before, so it appeared only as a notification that I dismissed without reading. Henry from HR declined. Peterson from IT declined. Someone from legal whose name I didn't recognize declined. By noon, my phone showed 78 missed calls and a cascade of messages, the tone growing more desperate as the morning passed and I remained silent. The messages told their own story, a story of escalating panic. The first ones were perfectly professional. Eleanor, we need to discuss some technical issues. Please call back when convenient. Then the cracks began to show. This is extremely urgent. Please respond immediately. After that, all traces of professional courtesy disappeared entirely. Whatever this is, we can fix it. Just call me back. And finally, from Grayson himself, a message sent just after 11:30. What do you want? Name your price? Name your price. As if this were just a financial negotiation, as if every problem in the world could be reduced to a number written on a check and made to disappear. My phone vibrated again. Another call. Grayson. The 14th since 2 a.m. I let it go straight to voicemail. I made coffee. Standing by the hotel window, I watched the sun rise behind the buildings, the light gradually shifting the snow on the street from gray to white, then to pale gold, making the city below look almost beautiful. I suddenly remembered the last time I'd watched a sunrise with Grayson. Years ago, after a night we'd spent awake talking about dreams, about fears, about the things we thought we would build together. He had fallen asleep on my shoulder, and I had stayed still, believing that was love, quiet trust, vulnerability given without fear of being used. When did everything change? When did we stop being two people leaning against each other in sleep and become two opponents standing at opposite ends of a corporate chessboard? I could point to a few specific markers: the day he became CEO, the shift in his tone, the new friends, the new priorities, the way the word we was gradually replaced by I in every sentence. But the truth was probably more complicated than that. Marriages rarely end in one dramatic moment. They die slowly through thousands of small choices, thousands of tiny deaths of intimacy, until one day you wake up and realize you're living with a stranger who just happens to share your last name. I let them stew for 3 days. Not out of cruelty, though I won't deny there was a certain satisfaction in knowing they were panicking, while I sat quietly in a hotel room, drinking bad coffee and reading industry news. That silence was calculated. It was meant to achieve very specific objectives. I needed them to fully understand the extent of their dependence on the systems I had built. I needed them to call in outside experts, people who would tear their hair out over code that was both architecturally elegant and completely impenetrable without documentation only the original architect possessed. I needed Grayson sitting in emergency board meetings, trying to explain to increasingly furious directors why the company's competitive advantage was dissolving like mist under the early sun. I needed Grayson to realize that he had made a catastrophic mistake when he betrayed me. 3 days later, the phone rang at 7:14. Grayson's personal number, the one he gave to family and key business partners, not the office line filtered through assistants and screening. I let it ring 4 times before answering. A small gesture, but enough to satisfy the part of me that needed him to wait, needed him to feel even a flicker of uncertainty about whether I would pick up. Eleanor. His voice held none of the authority I'd heard in his office 4 days earlier. He sounded weaker now, like a man who had just discovered the foundation of his house was built on land he didn't own, and the real owner had just informed him the lease was about to expire. We need to meet in person. There are things too complicated to discuss over the phone. No, I said, keeping my voice calm and level, refusing to mirror any urgency or anxiety. I didn't answer to hear you negotiate, I continued, my tone steady, neither raised nor lowered. I just want you to understand exactly where you stand." On the other end, Grayson went silent. I could picture him standing in his familiar office, one hand resting on the dark wooden desk, his gaze reaching past the glass walls that once made him believe he controlled everything. "4 days ago," I went on, "you demanded that I apologize. Not because of competence, not because I was wrong, but because I was your wife." "Eleanor," he said, trying to keep his voice composed, "if there's been a misunderstanding—" "There's no misunderstanding," I cut him off. "Only a false assumption. You thought I would bow my head, that you owned the technology outright, that I would only comply when you cut off my salary and my career advancement. That wasn't reality." I heard a chair shift softly. "The license renewal was due 3 days ago," I continued. "I didn't sign it. Every hour that passes, your company's systems are running on borrowed time. The authentication errors you're seeing, those aren't glitches. They're a countdown." The air on the other end seemed to thicken. When Grayson spoke again, his voice had changed, smaller, more careful. "So, what do you want?" That question said everything. He still thought this was a negotiation, that everything ultimately came down to money, titles, or a deal large enough to silence the other side. "I can reinstate you," he said quickly, clinging to a familiar escape route. "Not just reinstate, promote you, equity, a board seat. We can—" "No," I replied. One word, no explanation needed. "I don't want to come back," I said. "I don't want a promotion. I don't want equity." Grayson froze. "Eleanor, even if we're married, you need to be realistic." "I am being very realistic," I cut in. "What I need isn't on a payroll." I walked to the window. The city was fully awake, cars moving, people heading to work, the world continuing, as if every empire were only temporary. "I want the truth," I said slowly. "I want you to acknowledge that you and your mistress used corporate power for personal retaliation. I want accountability, not behind closed doors, not through wire transfers, but in records, in minutes, with you standing in front of the board and calling things by their proper names." Grayson shouted, "That's impossible!" The call ended in his anger. My phone went silent again. But I knew that somewhere, in a sunlit office, my former husband and his mistress were looking at each other, realizing for the first time a very simple truth. I was gone, and they no longer controlled me. The phone vibrated again. Not Grayson. I picked up. This time it was Richard. My father-in-law's voice came through direct, no preamble, hoarse and heavy. "Olivia just called me. She's in Grayson's office. They're both trying to find you. They want to know where you are." "I'm at a hotel," I said, my eyes still following the sunlight spilling down onto the street. "Finishing up a few things." There was a long silence on the other end. Long enough for me to hear him exhale, slow and deep. "Eleanor," he finally said, his voice dropping lower. "You resigned. There are no HR violations on your record. I checked everything." I closed my eyes, not from surprise, but from a strange feeling, as if someone had finally spoken the truth out loud and called it by its proper name. "Grayson is saying you abandoned your position, that there were issues with your collaborative attitude," he continued. "I told him plainly, if he keeps fabricating stories, keeps using HR for personal retaliation, the company will face serious legal risk." I could picture the scene clearly. The corner office, morning light cutting across the conference table. Grayson standing there, impatient. Olivia seated beside him, hands clenched, eyes flicking constantly to her phone. And Richard, his father, standing opposite them, no longer the indulgent parent, but the chairman of the board, protecting the last remaining boundaries of legality and the company's reputation. "I told them you are no longer within their control," he went on. "And if they try to drag you back through threats or manipulation, I will treat it as retaliation following separation." I opened my eyes. Sunlight now covered the entire road. The city was fully awake. How did they react? I asked. Richard let out a short, humorless laugh. Panic. Olivia keeps asking whether you sent anything else. Grayson keeps repeating that this is just a misunderstanding, that everything can be handled internally. I imagined Grayson in that moment. For the first time in many years, he no longer knew whom to call, what power to invoke, what document to sign to force everything back into its familiar alignment. I had moved beyond his reach, and that terrified him. I made it very clear, Richard concluded. You left legally. Your record is clean, no complaints, no violations, and I advised them to stop, before they turn this into a lawsuit the press would love. I thanked him. No embellishment, no long explanations, just a quiet acknowledgement between two people who understood that there are moments when standing on the right side matters more than standing with blood. Do you have any demands? He asked when he spoke again, his voice rougher now. You know I built this company from nothing. I don't want to watch it collapse. No, I said. I only want Grayson and his mistress to be held accountable for their decisions. Silence. Long. Heavy. For the first time, I heard something in Richard's breathing he had never revealed before. Uncertainty. Eleanor, he said slowly, you've just removed all their power. I know, I replied. ACT-10. The tech industry reacted faster than I expected. Within just a few hours of the system failures at my former company becoming visible to clients and competitors, my inbox filled with emails from people who knew only fragments of the story and wanted more, or wanted to test the waters for collaboration. The old company's stock was plunging, and at first, no one understood why, until someone traced it back to a licensing dispute with Apex Sentinel Security, a name no one had ever heard before. And then they discovered that the owner was me. That same day, two companies reached out with vice president-level offers. Another wanted to discuss acquiring Apex Sentinel Security outright. For months at my old company, I had been nearly invisible. My contributions had been systematically erased. Now, those same people were scrambling to understand how I had built something so critical that its absence could paralyze an entire corporation. By evening, I had 3 formal offers, each one offering compensation more than double what I'd earned before. One came with a signing bonus larger than my entire annual income at the old company. I reviewed everything carefully, not just the money, but the culture, the autonomy, and whether I would once again be stepping into an environment where leadership relationships could bring down an entire enterprise. Before midnight, I declined them all. When I hit send on the confirmation emails, I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't just leaving the past behind. It was stepping into a future I would build on my own terms, with people who truly understood my value. I closed my laptop and sat quietly in the hotel room, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Excitement, without fear. My phone kept vibrating with notifications I didn't read. Missed calls from numbers I no longer considered important. The panic of Grayson and his mistress faded into background noise. Something I learned to ignore as I focused on the future I was deliberately creating. Grayson kept calling after the day I left. I unblocked his number, partly out of curiosity about what he would say now. The voicemails told a story of escalating desperation. At first, irritation. What are you doing? You need to stop. I deleted it. 3 days later, his voice wavered. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But can we talk? By the third message, the fear was unmistakable. He was under investigation. The board was discussing forcing him out permanently. Do you want to destroy me? In the 8th week, Grayson showed up at the building where I was preparing to open the first office for Apex Sentinel Security. I was in a meeting when security called, saying a man claiming to be my husband was waiting in the lobby. I opened the camera on my phone. He stood there holding an expensive bouquet of roses, the kind you buy when desperation has replaced understanding. He looked smaller than he did in my memory. Not physically, but in something deeper. The confidence that once surrounded him was gone, replaced by an awkwardness visible in the way he kept shifting his weight. I heard him tell security, "We're separated." The word was very Grayson. Separation sounded temporary, negotiable, reversible. It softened the truth that he had deliberately abandoned me. Security called up to the office. "Ms. Eleanor, there's a man named Grayson Vaughn who wants to see you. Says he's your husband. Should I let him up?" I looked at the screen. The flowers were already beginning to wilt slightly under the artificial lights. And I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no satisfaction. Just neutral observation, like watching a stranger deal with a problem that no longer concerned me. "No," I said. "Tell him I'm in a meeting and it will run long. If he needs to discuss anything, he can call." I watched Grayson receive the message. Confusion crossed his face, then irritation, then resignation. He set the bouquet down at the reception desk and walked away, shoulders hunched against the cold, both the weather and the emotional kind. Then the official announcement came. On Thursday afternoon, the old company released a press statement, timed deliberately after market close to reduce immediate impact. It was a masterpiece of corporate language, saying just enough to deliver the news, not a word more than necessary to limit legal exposure. Following an internal review of operations and governance, the company announced a restructuring of its security division and leadership team. The CEO had agreed to take temporary administrative leave pending a comprehensive review of governance and decision-making processes. To outsiders, it might have seemed like a routine announcement. But to anyone fluent in corporate language, every phrase signaled a contained disaster. Internal review meant serious misconduct. Temporary administrative leave meant forced removal. Comprehensive review meant everything was now under a microscope. 2 board members resigned immediately. The stock dropped 18% before trading was halted. I sat at my new desk at Apex Sentinel Security, watching the city lights slowly come on, processing the news with a tangle of emotions that were hard to name. Part of me felt vindicated. At last, they were facing the consequences of their reckless decisions. But part of me felt empty, as if I had prepared for a confrontation that was now unfolding without me there to witness it. Tech media piled on within hours, digging into the licensing dispute, the governance failures, and the question of how a major corporation had built its competitive edge on technology it never truly owned. A CT-11. I no longer kept Apex Sentinel Security as something that existed only on paper. I turned it into a real company with its own office downtown, a team of engineers I recruited myself, talented young people who had been overlooked because they lacked connections or prestigious degrees. We built a new version of the core system, safer, smarter, and this time every patent carried my name, openly, without concealment. The next 6 weeks passed like a whirlwind of onboarding sessions, team meetings, and the familiar chaos of leading my own company. The new role gave me exactly what my former company had denied me: autonomy, resources, and recognition. I had a team of 20 engineers, chosen for ability, not politics. A budget that allowed ideas to be implemented, not just discussed. And above all, the freedom to build something new without constantly having to justify its existence. We launched Fortress Protocol 5.0 at a major tech conference in November, 2 months after I left my old company. The timing was carefully calculated, far enough removed to make it clear this was not a knee-jerk reaction, but the natural progression of a journey I had been quietly walking for years. And this time, I was the one standing on the stage. I founded a program to support women in technology, a scholarship and mentorship fund I simply called Second Draft, because I believe everyone deserves the chance to rewrite their story. On Wednesday evenings, I sat with young women in brightly lit conference rooms, listening to them talk about being dismissed for lacking connections, and I shared my own story, not to boast, but to show them that wounds can become strength. Then came the major government contract, a national security project Monroe bid on. When we won, the revenue from that single contract far exceeded everything my former department had ever brought in for my old company, Von Tech Industries, even in its best year. I stood on stage accepting the contract, camera flashes bursting around me, but my mind went back to that hotel room years earlier, where I had sat alone with bad coffee and pain I couldn't yet name. A year later, I live in a small apartment overlooking the Hudson River. Not luxurious, nothing to prove. In the mornings, I wake early, brew truly good coffee, then sit by the window watching the water move slowly, silver under the weak winter sun. I no longer check my phone constantly. I no longer flinch at notifications. There is only the sound of water, the cries of seagulls, and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. Despite Richard's efforts, the old company has shrunk, like an aging building gradually worn down by time. Grayson was transferred to a small branch in a distant state he once called where careers go to die. Olivia left long ago, fading from the tech world without leaving any meaningful trace. I don't follow it anymore. I don't need the details. I only know that they now live with their choices, and I live with mine. Some evenings I walk along the river, cold wind brushing my hair, and I realize I no longer carry that pain. It is lightened, dissolved, like the snow from years ago falling into the Hudson and merging with the current, flowing out to sea, leaving no trace. I don't hate anymore. I don't need public forgiveness. I only need peace. And I understand now that true freedom is not a grand victory over those who once hurt you. Freedom is when, on a winter morning, you sit by the window with a warm cup of coffee, watch the river flow, and realize your heart no longer feels heavy, that you let go long ago without needing to announce it to anyone. Sometimes, in those quiet moments, I whisper to myself a sentence that has become my personal truth. We don't need to take revenge on those who pushed us out the door. We only need to walk through a new door and never look back. Because beyond that door, the light belongs to those who have learned to love themselves enough to leave. Snow is falling softly again outside, like it did that Christmas Eve years ago. But this time, I only smile, pull my coat tighter, and keep drinking my coffee. Everything is all right. Truly all right. 1 year after the day I left, I no longer dream of that Christmas night, or of Olivia's laughter in my former husband's room. I dream of the young women in my mentorship program smiling brightly as they receive their scholarships, of the Hudson River shimmering each morning when I open the curtains. I live calmly. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I don't need validation from anyone but myself. I am free, and that is enough. Snow continues to fall, covering the paths in white, but I know that beneath the snow, spring is quietly preparing. Like me. Like all of us who were once hurt, once pushed out of a new old door, but still chose to walk forward, still chose to believe that there is light ahead meant just for us. And when you've walked far enough, you will look back, not with hatred, not with regret, but only to whisper thank you. Thank you that the old door closed so the new one could open. Thank you that the pain of long ago taught us how to fly. I'm flying now, and the sky is vast, endlessly wide.